The crystalline spires of the Aetherian war chamber sparkled with holographic battle formations, their perfect geometric patterns reflecting off Princess Thera's iridescent skin. She stood before the High Command, her silver eyes fixed on the latest battle simulation. The same formations their people had used for 10,000 years played out before her, precise, predictable, and increasingly obsolete. High Commander Voss, Thera addressed the ancient warrior before her, his ceremonial armor gleaming with the light of 1,000 victories. The Drachnid forces are adapting to our tactics. They're exploiting the predictability of our attack patterns. Voss's face hardened, the bioluminescent markings on his temples pulsing with barely contained irritation. Our formations are perfect, Your Highness. They have been refined over millennia. The problem lies not with our tactics, but with the execution. Thera gestured at the hologram, where red markers indicated their latest losses. Perfect patterns become perfect targets, High Commander. I've been studying transmissions from a planet called Earth. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Voss raised a hand, silencing the room. Earth? That primitive backwater? They haven't even achieved stable antimatter containment. No, Thera agreed, but they've mastered something else, adaptation. Their entire military history is built on constant evolution, on changing tactics to meet new threats. She waved her hand through the hologram, bringing up intercepted footage from Earth's most recent conflicts. The images showed small units moving independently, using terrain, employing unconventional strategies. Look how they operate. No fixed patterns. Each unit thinks independently while working toward a common goal. Chaos, spat Commander Lyrics, her crystalline armor chiming softly as she stepped forward. You would have us abandon 10,000 years of proven strategy for disorder? Thera felt her frustration rising, the bioluminescent patterns across her skin flickering with emotion. I would have us survive. The Drachnids have already destroyed 3 outer colonies. They've learned to predict every move we make. Enough. The voice rang through the chamber like a bell. Queen Celera, Thera's mother, rose from her throne. Her presence commanded immediate silence, her bioluminescence radiating authority. Daughter, your concern for our people is admirable, but we cannot abandon our ways for alien barbarism. Mother, please dash. The council has heard enough. Queen Celera's voice was final. You will cease this fascination with primitive warfare immediately. But Thera stood her ground, her own luminescence brightening with determination. Then let me prove it. Give me 1 ship, 1 crew. Let me demonstrate how these primitive tactics could be adapted to our technology. The silence that followed was deafening. Thera could feel the weight of 10,000 years of tradition pressing down on her. Finally, her mother spoke again, but her words were not what anyone expected. Very well. The queen's expression was unreadable. You shall have your chance, but not as you propose. You will go to Earth yourself, in disguise, as part of a diplomatic mission. Study their warfare firsthand. When you return, if you still believe their ways have merit, you will have your ship. The council erupted in protest, but Queen Celera silenced them with a gesture. But know this, daughter, if you fail, if these human tactics prove as primitive as we believe, you will take your place on the council and never speak of this again. Thera bowed deeply, hiding both her triumph and her fear. Thank you, mother. I accept your terms. As she left the chamber, Thera's mind was already racing with possibilities. She had studied Earth's military history in secret for months, fascinated by their adaptability, their creativity in the face of overwhelming odds. Now she would see it firsthand. But as her private shuttle carried her to her quarters, doubt crept in. The Drachnids were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Could their tactics truly be adapted to space warfare? And more importantly, could she convince her people to change millennia of tradition before it was too late? In her quarters, Thera accessed her private database of Earth's military history one last time. Images of ancient battles flashed before her, humans fighting against impossible odds, adapting, surviving, winning. Tomorrow she would begin her journey to Earth, and with it, perhaps the salvation of her people. As she watched the stars through her window, Thora made a silent vow. She would master these human ways of war, blend them with her people's advanced technology, and create something new. The Drachnids were coming, and the old ways would not be enough to stop them. The future of the Aetherian Empire would depend on her success. Tradition would have to bow to survival. Learning from the enemy. The Nevada desert sprawled beneath Thora's cloaked shuttle, an alien landscape of reds and browns so different from the crystalline cities of her homeworld. She adjusted her holographic disguise, checking once more that her luminescent skin was properly masked to appear human. Her cover identity was that of Dr. Tara Sterling, a visiting military historian from Britain. The human military base grew larger in her viewport, a collection of angular buildings and training grounds that seemed primitive compared to Aetherian architecture. Yet something about its utilitarian design spoke of efficiency, of function over form. Just like their tactics, she thought. Colonel Nathan Hayes waited on the tarmac as her shuttle, disguised as a small private jet, touched down. He was a weathered man in his 40s, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Thora had specifically requested him as her liaison after studying his combat record. He was known for unconventional thinking and successful adaptation of classical tactics to modern warfare. Dr. Sterling, he greeted her with a firm handshake. Welcome to Fort Ironclad. Thora returned the grip carefully, conscious of her superior strength. Colonel Hayes. Thank you for agreeing to this research project. Your insights into adaptive tactical response could prove invaluable. Just doing my part for international cooperation, he replied, but his eyes studied her carefully. Though I admit, I'm curious why a historian is so interested in current military doctrine. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, Thora quoted, remembering her briefing on Earth sayings. And those who study it well might find new applications for old wisdom. Hayes nodded approvingly. Sun Tzu. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Come on, I'll show you around. Over the next few weeks, Thora immersed herself in human military training. She observed their exercises, studied their tactics, and most importantly, learned how they thought. Colonel Hayes proved an excellent teacher, breaking down complex strategies into their core principles. The key isn't the specific tactic, he explained during one session, pointing to a map of a historical battle. It's understanding why it worked in that situation and how to adapt it to new circumstances. Thora leaned forward, fascinated. But how do you maintain unit cohesion without strict formations? Without predetermined patterns? Shared purpose, clear objectives, and trust in your people to think on their feet, Hayes replied. Every soldier knows the mission goal, but they have flexibility in how to achieve it. Sometimes the person on the ground sees opportunities that command never could. This concept was revolutionary to Thora. Aetherian military doctrine emphasized perfect execution of predetermined plans. The idea of giving individual units tactical freedom seemed chaotic, yet she couldn't deny the results. During practical exercises, Hayes insisted she participate rather than just observe. Thora found herself crawling through mud, learning small unit tactics, and studying how terrain could be used to advantage. Every lesson seemed to challenge her preconceptions about warfare. Your people must have impressive military technology, Hayes remarked one evening as they reviewed the day's training footage. Thora tensed. What makes you say that? The way you think about warfare, very linear, very dependent on technical superiority. Like someone used to having the bigger stick. He gave her a knowing look. But sometimes the bigger stick isn't enough, is it? Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the base. Hayes grabbed his phone, his expression turning grave. We've got a situation. Terrorist attack on a civilian target in progress. My team's being called in. Thora stood. Let me observe. Please. This could be valuable field experience. Hayes hesitated, then nodded. Stay in the command center. Watch and learn. The next hours were a revelation. Thora watched as Hayes coordinated his team against a numerically superior force. They used the building's architecture against the terrorists, split into smaller units to create confusion, and adapted their plans on the fly as circumstances changed. When it was over, the hostages were safe and casualties were minimal. That was. Thora struggled to find the right words. Impressive. Your forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and in an unfavorable position. Yet you prevailed. Because we didn't try to fight on their terms, Hayes explained. We changed the game. Made them react to us instead of the other way around. That night, in the privacy of her quarters, Thora recorded her observations with growing excitement. The humans' approach to warfare wasn't primitive at all, it was evolutionary. They had learned to adapt because they had to, because they couldn't always rely on superior technology or numbers. But something else was bothering her. Colonel Hayes's comments suggested he suspected she wasn't who she claimed to be. Yet he continued to teach her, to share their military knowledge. Why? A message from home interrupted her thoughts. The Drachnids had attacked another colony. The traditional tactics had failed again. Time was running out. As she stared at the casualty reports, Thora made a decision. She needed more than just tactical knowledge, she needed to understand how humans thought about warfare at a fundamental level. And perhaps it was time to trust Colonel Hayes with the truth. After all, if humans had taught her anything, it was that sometimes the riskiest move was the right one. Crisis at home. The emergency transmission cut through Thora's meditation like a plasma blade. Her holographic disguise flickered momentarily as her concentration broke, revealing a flash of her luminescent skin. Thankfully, she was alone in her quarters. The message was coded at the highest priority level, marked with the royal seal. Her hands trembled slightly as she decrypted it, and when the holographic display materialized, her worst fears were confirmed. The Drachnids had launched a major offensive against the Etherian core worlds. The tactical display told a devastating story. The traditional Etherian battle formations, beautiful in their geometric precision, had been shattered. The Drachnids had developed countermeasures for every standard maneuver, every traditional response. 3 defense fleets had been destroyed, their rigid formations turned into perfect target zones. A second transmission followed, this one from Colonel Hayes. Dr. Sterling, we need to talk. My office, immediately. Thora's heart raced. Had her cover been compromised? Had Earth detected the Drachnid advance? She straightened her uniform and made sure her holographic disguise was stable before heading to Hayes's office. He was waiting for her, his desk covered with satellite imagery. Want to explain why there's a battle happening in high orbit that our telescopes can't quite make out? His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Or should I address you by your real title, Your Highness? Thora felt her carefully constructed world tilt. How long have you known? Since your first day. Your combat instincts are too refined for a historian, and sometimes you look at our technology like it's ancient history. He leaned forward. But I kept teaching because I figured if an advanced civilization was willing to learn from us, they must be desperate. Before Thora could respond, another emergency transmission cut through her communicator. This one was visual, live footage from the capital. The Drachnid fleet had broken through the outer defenses. The crystalline spires of her home were burning. Hayes watched the holographic display without surprise. I'm guessing those are the folks you're really preparing to fight. Yes. Thora dropped her holographic disguise, revealing her true form. My people are warriors, Colonel. We've been undefeated for 10,000 years. But the Drachnids, they studied us. Learned us. And now they're destroying us because we refuse to change. Hayes walked to a wall of military histories. You know what happened to armies that refused to adapt throughout Earth's history? They lost. Usually badly. He pulled out a book. But the ones that survived learned to evolve. I need to return home, Thora said, watching another defense platform fall to the Drachnid assault. My people need me. They need more than just you, Hayes replied. They need to change how they think about warfare. Your technology, combined with our tactical flexibility. He let the thought hang. Thora's mind raced. What he was suggesting would be unprecedented, a human military advisor to the Etherian Empire. The council would be outraged. But watching her homeworld burn, she couldn't bring herself to care about tradition anymore. Come with me, she said suddenly. Both as proof of what I've learned and as an advisor. Help me save my people. Hayes's response was interrupted by another emergency transmission. The Drachnids had breached the inner defense ring. The capital was under direct attack. When do we leave? Hayes asked, already reaching for his go bag. Now. My shuttle's cloaked behind the base. As they rushed to the hidden shuttle, Hayes made a quick call to his superiors, explaining he was being deployed on a classified international mission. It wasn't entirely a lie. The shuttle lifted off, its cloaking field shimmering as it accelerated to escape velocity. As Earth fell away behind them, Thora engaged the quantum drive. Your people won't accept change easily, Hayes warned as the stars blurred around them. Even with their worlds burning. They don't have to accept it, Thora replied, her voice hard. They just have to survive. We'll make them see reason later. The quantum drive hummed as it prepared for the jump home. Thora thought about what awaited them, a civilization in crisis, a military council set in its ways, and an enemy that had turned their own perfection against them. But for the first time since the Drachnid attacks began, she felt hope. Because she wasn't just bringing new tactics home, she was bringing a new way of thinking about warfare itself. As the shuttle jumped to quantum space, Thora reviewed everything she had learned on Earth. The Drachnids had studied and countered the old ways of Etherian warfare. But they hadn't prepared for what she was bringing back, the unpredictable, adaptive, innovative spirit of human combat doctrine. The real question was, would she be in time to save her people from their own rigid perfection? Revolution in warfare. The quantum drive disengaged with a flash, revealing a scene of devastation that made even Hayes catch his breath. The crystalline cities of Etheria, once perfect in their geometric beauty, now bore the scars of Drachnid weapons fire. Defense platforms drifted in ruins, their formations still perfect even in destruction. Your high command, where would they be? Hayes asked, studying the tactical display. The deep fortress, Thora replied, piloting the shuttle through the debris field. It's below the planet's crust. Even the Drachnids can't reach it. The shuttle dove through the atmosphere, weaving between battles. The Drachnid ships were methodically destroying everything in their path, while Etherian vessels continued to fight in their traditional patterns, and continued to die. They landed in a crystalline hangar deep underground. A squad of royal guards immediately surrounded them, their energy weapons trained on Hayes. Stand down, Thora commanded, her royal markings glowing with authority. He's with me. High Commander Voss stormed into the hangar, his ceremonial armor scorched from recent battle. Princess Thora. You abandon your people in their hour of need to study primitives, and then you dare bring one here? I bring solutions, Thora shot back. While you lead our forces to slaughter with tactics the enemy can predict to the microsecond. The argument was interrupted by Queen Solara's arrival. She looked older than when Thora had left, the weight of losing battles evident in her bearing. Mother, Thora bowed. This is Colonel Hayes. He's here to help. Help? Voss scoffed. What can a primitive teach us about warfare? Hayes stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing another Etherian fleet in formation. They're about to lose 3 cruisers on the left flank. Moments later, Drachnid ships appeared exactly where Hayes had predicted, destroying the ships in question. The room fell silent. You see, Hayes continued. Your formations are beautiful, perfect, and perfectly predictable. The Drachnids have run simulations, probably millions of them. They know every move you'll make before you make it. Queen Celera studied Hayes intently. And you propose an alternative? Not an alternative, Your Majesty. An evolution. Hayes gestured to the tactical display. Your technology, your capabilities, they're far beyond ours. But you fight like every battle is a formal dance. We can show you how to fight like water, flowing, adapting, striking where least expected. The Queen looked at her daughter. You believe this will work? I've seen it, Mother. Their methods seem chaotic, but there's a deeper order to them. One the Drachnids won't expect. A massive explosion rocked the fortress. Above them, another defense line had fallen. We don't have time for debate, Thera pressed. Give me one fleet. Let me show you. Queen Celera's expression hardened. Commander Voss, give Princess Thera command of the 4th Fleet. My Queen dash. Do it. We're running out of options. The next hours were a blur of activity. Hayes worked with Thera to reorganize the 4th Fleet into smaller, more flexible battle groups. They programmed new command protocols, allowing ship captains more tactical autonomy while maintaining strategic coordination. The key, Hayes explained to the skeptical captains, is to be unpredictable while staying coordinated. Each ship, each group adapts to the situation, but all working toward the same objective. Some captains embraced the new approach eagerly, while others resisted. But as Thera reminded them, the choice isn't between tradition and change anymore. It's between change and extinction. The first test came sooner than expected. A Drachnid battle group broke through the outer system defenses, heading for a civilian evacuation corridor. 4th Fleet, engage, Thera commanded from her flagship. Battle groups, you have your objectives. How you achieve them is up to you. What followed stunned the watching High Command. Instead of forming the traditional geometric patterns, the 4th Fleet dispersed into seemingly random groups. They used the system's asteroid fields for cover, emerged from unexpected vectors, struck and disappeared again. The Drachnids, prepared for traditional Etherian tactics, found their own formations disrupted. Their attempts to predict and counter Etherian movements failed as each battle group acted independently yet coordinated. When it was over, the Drachnid force had been destroyed. The 4th Fleet's losses were minimal. In the deep fortress command center, silence reigned as the battle replay ended. Commander Voss was the first to speak. It looks chaotic. But it worked, Queen Celera observed. How quickly can we implement these changes across the entire fleet? Hayes stepped forward. With respect, Your Majesty, it's not just about changing formations. Your commanders, your crews, they need to learn to think differently. To make decisions independently while staying true to the mission. Then we'll learn, Thera declared. Quickly. As the command center erupted in discussion, Hayes pulled Thera aside. They're starting to believe. But the Drachnids won't give you much time to prepare. Thera watched the tactical display, where more enemy fleets were gathering. Then we'll have to be faster than they expect. After all, she smiled slightly, isn't unpredictability what you've been teaching me? The revolution in Etherian warfare had begun. But would it be enough to turn the tide of war? The final battle. The massive Drachnid armada emerged from quantum space like a storm of living metal, their biomechanical ships darkening the skies above Etheria. This wasn't just another attack, it was their endgame, a force large enough to end the Etherian civilization forever. In the deep fortress command center, Thera stood with Hayes, watching the enemy deployment. The last month had been a blur of training, adaptation, and small victories as more Etherian fleet commanders embraced the new tactics. But they'd never faced anything like this. They're arranging for a full planetary siege, Hayes observed, studying the enemy formations. Standard doctrine would be to match them symmetrically, try to hold them at each approach vector. Which is exactly what they're expecting, Thera replied. She turned to address the assembled fleet commanders, their holograms flickering in the chamber. You've all learned to think differently, to fight differently. Today, we prove that evolution beats perfection. Queen Celera entered the command center, her royal armor gleaming. The evacuation of civilian centers is complete. Whatever happens today, our people will survive. She looked at her daughter. The fleet is yours to command, Thera. Show us what humanity has taught you. Thera's battle plan was unlike anything in Etherian military history. Instead of arranging their forces in traditional defensive spheres, she split their combined fleets into hundreds of small, autonomous battle groups. Some would hide in the debris fields of destroyed orbital platforms. Others would use the system's dense asteroid belts for cover. The rest would appear to retreat in disarray. Remember, Hayes advised the commanders, your strength isn't in formation but in adaptation. Hit them where they're weak, disappear when they're strong. Make them fight shadows while we strike at their heart. The Drachnid advance began with typical precision. Their forces moved in perfect attack patterns, ready to counter the traditional Etherian responses. But those responses never came. Instead, Etherian battle groups struck from multiple vectors simultaneously, their attacks seemingly random but precisely coordinated. Using their superior knowledge of local space, they turned debris fields and asteroids into weapons, forcing Drachnid ships into killing zones before vanishing again. They're trying to reform their attack patterns, Thera observed as the battle unfolded. But they can't predict where we'll strike next because every commander is making independent tactical decisions. The Drachnid's perfect formations began to break apart as they tried to adapt to the new Etherian tactics. Their attempts to establish a siege pattern failed as they were forced to defend against attacks from every direction. But the enemy's numerical superiority was still overwhelming. Despite their successes, the Etherian forces were being pushed back. Ships were lost, brave crews sacrificed as they bought time for their companions to strike devastating blows. They're starting to adapt, Hayes warned, watching the tactical display. Running their own version of our tactics. Thera smiled grimly. That's what we wanted. Because adaptation goes both ways. She opened a channel to all commands. Execute Protocol Sunbreak. Across the battlefield, Etherian ships suddenly activated experimental quantum field generators, technology they'd been holding in reserve. The generators created localized distortions in spacetime, temporarily disrupting the Drachnid's ability to coordinate their forces. Your people may be learning to fight like us, Hayes transmitted to the Drachnid command ship. But you're 10,000 years behind in learning to think like us. The battle reached its crescendo as the remaining Etherian forces struck the now disorganized Drachnid fleet from all sides. Ships fought in swooping, unpredictable patterns, trading the geometry of traditional space combat for the fluid dynamics of aerial warfare. The Drachnid command ship, realizing their perfect strategy had been turned against them, attempted to rally their forces for one final push. But they had lost the initiative, and their troops had lost the certainty that had made them so formidable. When the quantum storms cleared and the debris settled, the massive Drachnid armada was in retreat, their remaining ships fleeing into quantum space. The cost had been heavy, nearly a third of the Etherian fleet was destroyed or disabled. But their homeworld stood, and more importantly, their civilization had evolved. In the aftermath, Queen Celera stood in the royal chamber, addressing the combined fleet commanders. For 10,000 years, we believed perfection was our strength. Today we learned that true strength lies in the ability to change, to adapt, to evolve. She turned to Hayes. Colonel, the Etherian Empire owes you a debt we can never repay. Thank humanity as a whole, Hayes replied. We learned these lessons the hard way, over thousands of years of warfare. You learned them in months because you had to. Thera stepped forward. And now we can teach others. The Drachnids will return, and they won't be the last to threaten us. But we'll be ready. Not because our tactics are perfect, but because they never will be. We'll keep changing, keep adapting. As she looked out over her homeworld, watching reconstruction ships already at work repairing the damage, Thera reflected on how far they'd come. Her people had learned that true strength wasn't in perfect execution of unchanging plans, but in the ability to face the unknown with creativity and courage. The Aetherian Empire would survive, not as a crystal frozen in perfect geometry, but as a living thing, growing, changing, evolving. And somewhere out there, the Drachnids were learning a lesson humanity had taught many others throughout history: underestimate us at your peril.